It's a deep blue sea, deep blue sea, it's a deep blue sea, deep blue sea, it's a deep blue sea. You're so blue, a brilliant blue, deep blue sea. You're so blue, a brilliant blue, deep blue sea. Chandrasekhar Venkatraman, or Sir C.V. Raman as we know him better, was standing on the deck of the steamship SS Narkanda, and he adjusted his turban a little bit. He gazed out into the deep blue Mediterranean Sea. He was fascinated by the color of the sea. And as he stood there looking out, there was a burning question buzzing in his head under that turban. But I'm not going to tell you what that question was. Before I tell you that, I will take you back now in time to 1888, the year when C.V. Raman was born. Now, C.V. Raman grew up in the seaside town of Vishakhapatnam in South India. And as a young boy, he loved to sit by the sea. He loved to look at the sea and look at the sky and its changing colors. He loved to look at the stars, the flowers. He loved to listen to his father play the violin. But he didn't just sit around looking at these things. He asked questions. When he looked at the sky, he wanted to know what gave the sky its colors. When he looked at the stars, he wanted to know what made the stars twinkle. When he listened to his father's violin, he wanted to know how music was produced by the violin. And he didn't have, in those days, Ask Google or Hey Siri. So what did Raman do? Raman went to books. And what kind of books? Textbooks. For his house was filled with the textbooks that his father had, for he was a teacher. And so Raman spent all his time looking for answers in those textbooks. He read textbooks on algebra, on calculus, on geometry, on trigonometry. He understood them all by himself. And he had also begun to read books by very famous mathematicians and scientists like Euclid and Tyndall and Faraday and Helmholtz, all these very important names. And well, Raman was excellent at academics. So good that he finished school by the time he was 11 years old. Can you imagine that? He had finished school by 11. He got his bachelor's degree by the time he was 14. And by the time he was 17, he had completed his master's with a gold medal in physics and English. Now, he was so brilliant that his professors during his master's program told him, well, Raman, we don't have anything more that we can teach you. So we'll excuse you from attending classes. You can go around and do what you want. So guess what Raman did? He spent all his time in the laboratory because the questions he was now asking were very, very complex questions where answers could not be found in those textbooks, and certainly not Google back then. And so Raman began to pour into those books, and he also began to do experiments on sound and light. He would spend day after day doing those experiments, verifying the results, redoing the experiments till he felt that he had come close to the answer. Now, he also began to write about his experiments to journals and magazines outside of India because back then there was none of that available. Now, you would think that after a gold medal in physics, Raman would go off to become a hotshot scientist. Well, no, that wasn't the case because back then, nobody in India could dream of having a career in the sciences. There was simply no money to be made. So the only kind of jobs that were available to educate people back then were those that were given under the British administration, for which you had to write an exam. So Raman wrote the financial services exam and came first and got a job as the Assistant Accountant General and was posted to Calcutta. Now that meant he would have to spend days counting money for the British. But what about the scientist in him? Well, Raman thought that he would spend his spare time setting up his experiments and finding a space to do that at. But where? He was in a new city. He didn't know anybody. He didn't know where to go. Now that's when, one day, when he was traveling to work, he came across a building with a board that read the Indian Association for the Cultivation of Science, or the IACS, and he noted the address as 210 Beau Bazaar Street. He quickly took it down, and that evening, on his way back from work, Raman got off at that stop and walked into the building. And once he was inside, Raman noticed that the building was quite decrepit. It had not been well maintained. It was dusty. The labs were full of cobwebs. And the person inside the building told him, "Well, Mr. Raman, you see, this building was built by my uncle, and he was very keen that Indians pursue advanced science research, but there's been no interest, and so we haven't been able to maintain this building very well." Raman looked around and he declared, "Well, I will like to set up my experiments here. Can I do it?" The man there was thrilled. He said, "All these years, Mr. Raman, we have been waiting for a person just like you, and you have come at last." And so the very next day, Raman began to work at the IACS labs. From morning 7 to 9, he would be there to do his experiments. Then he would rush off home, quickly have his breakfast, change his clothes, and he would go back to work, where he would be from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then he would come back to the IACS, where he would start his research on the vibrations on the tabla and the mridangam. For that was what was occupying his imagination at that time. And eventually he brought out journals and he began to give many, many lectures about the things that he was experimenting on. And soon the IACS became a very popular place because people loved to come and listen to Raman talk about his work. He spoke with such clarity. He had such a fluent command over the language, and he also had a great sense of humor. So the IACS became a very popular place. Now the year was 1916. Raman had been working as an accountant during the day and as a scientist during the evenings. And he had been doing this for almost a decade. Now, it was around this time that he was asked to become the professor of physics at Calcutta University, and Raman was thrilled at the proposition, even though it meant taking half the pay, half the amount as salary as he was getting from the British government. But he said, "I'll take it," for it made him a full-time scientist. And now we come to the year 1921. Raman was invited to deliver a lecture at the Congress of Universities of the British Empire in Oxford, in the United Kingdom. Now, after he had finished that lecture and was returning to India, he was standing on board the ship, the SS Narkanda, which is where our story began. So let's go back there now. As Raman was standing on that deck, looking out into the deep blue sea, can you guess the question that was buzzing in his head? A very simple question. All Raman wanted to know was why the sea was blue. Why is the sea blue? A glass of water is colorless, but the sea is a brilliant blue. Why? Well, if you lived back then, you would probably have gotten the answer that the color of the sea is simply the color of the sky that is reflected. And this was a theory that was given by another scientist whose name was Lord Rayleigh. Now, he said that this was the effect of sunlight passing through the gases in the atmosphere and therefore the color blue. But Raman was not quite convinced. He thought for a moment and he said, "Well, how can what is true for gases be true for liquids?" Because in front of him was a huge body of liquid, the sea. And so it flashed across Raman's mind that the color, the blue color of the sea, could be, maybe could be, just caused by the water itself. And so he decided to investigate right then. Now, in those days, Raman carried a prism and a portable telescope right in his pocket. So he put his hands inside his pocket, took out these two things, set it up, and with this very basic equipment, he viewed the sea at a particular angle. And when he viewed the sea, he noticed something very intriguing. The blue of the sea became deeper. And this led Raman to conclude that the blue of the sea was a distinct phenomenon or a distinct feature in itself, and it had nothing to do with the color of the sky. It was very clear to Raman that when a beam of light hit the water, it was a particular color, but the light that was scattered was not. And so he suggested that when light hits the water, some of it is absorbed by the water and some of it is scattered back up. And because blue is scattered more than the other colors in the spectrum, it gives the sea its blue color. Now, do you know why traffic lights are red? All over the world, you will see the stop signs in only red. Have you ever wondered why? Because red scatters the least. It does not get, spread through the air. And so you can spot it from far away. That's what makes us have traffic lights in the color red all over. And now Raman was so thrilled with this discovery that he quickly wrote off a note to Nature magazine saying, "This is what I'm working on, and I'll let you know what results I get." And once he was back in Calcutta, Raman threw himself entirely into the study of his latest obsession, which he called light scattering. Not one, not two, but Raman spent the next 7 years studying the effect of light when it was passed through various liquids. And again, not one or two or not even 10, but Raman studied over 60 liquids. And then on February 28th, 1928, one of the experiments gave a very clear result. Now, on that day, along with one of his finest students, K.S. Krishnan, Raman noticed something. He said, "Look, Krishnan, when light of only one color is passed through a liquid, the light that emerges out, light that comes out, has small traces of another color. This is very interesting." And so, to be sure, they placed a violet filter or a violet film in front of a beam of light and let that violet light pass through a liquid. And then they observed that the light going out from that liquid was mostly violet, but it also had traces of green. Now, this meant that the liquid was in fact changing the color of some of the light passing through it. Exactly what had happened when he viewed the sea. What a moment that was. Raman ran about the place shouting like Archimedes had shouted, "Eureka, Eureka!" He wanted everybody to be called to come and see this effect, which was later known as the Raman effect, which is essentially the change in the color of light when passed through a particular material or a substance. Now, he gave a lecture on March 16th, 1928 in Bangalore. And very soon, this lecture was printed in the Indian Journal of Physics, and 3,000 reprints of this were made and sent to labs all over the world. And when the scientists got hold of this and when they read it, they acknowledged the importance of this effect. They realized what all they could now do with this knowledge. And this made Raman get nominated for the Nobel Prize in 1930, which he eventually went on to win. And when he won this, he was the first Asian non-white person in the world to be given this prize, and in a field of science. When Raman was at the awards, He was the only Indian who was sitting amidst a sea of European faces. Now, after receiving his award from King Gustav, Raman turned around to see the Union Jack, or the flag of the United Kingdom that he was sitting under. Tears streamed down his face when he realized that his poor country, India, did not even have a flag of her own. And so Raman devoted his life to nurture science and scientific thinking in India. The date of Raman's discovery, February 28th, is now celebrated as National Science Day in India. It all started with Raman asking a very simple question. Why is the sea blue? A question that nobody else asked, and even if they did, they didn't do much to find out why. There were several others on that ship, including the captain of the ship, but only Raman was curious enough to know or to find out what gave the sea its color. Now, isn't that saying something about his mind? Raman had this advice to young people. He wanted them to dream, and he wanted them to dream big. He said, everybody has two powers inside them, observation and thinking. And he wanted them to use it and stay curious forever. Ask the right questions and nature will reveal the answers, he said. And don't be satisfied with the quick answers, the short answers. If Raman had lived today, he would probably take Google away from everybody's computers. He wanted them to go deeper into the question and travel the entire length and breadth of science before they came close to the answer. So maybe you need to think now about the questions that you have about the world around you. And what answers would you like to have? And so, the Raman effect had applications, or still does have applications, in all areas of science. If you ever go to an airport, and if the police wants to find out what you're carrying, or let's say you're a smuggler and you're carrying drugs, how can the police find out without putting their hands inside your pockets? Well, there's a device called the Raman scanner. Just point and it will tell you what you're carrying. Or whenever any kind of chemical analysis needs to be done, the Raman effect comes into play. The Raman effect can also tell you how strong your bones are. And so Raman carried on research in the areas of science that fascinated him after his Nobel. He did not rest. Acoustics, optics, gems, minerals, astronomy, you name it. Until his last days, Raman did science throughout his life, from 1905 to 1970, day after day after day. He died peacefully on November 21st, 1970, at his house at the Raman Research Institute campus that he founded in Bangalore, surrounded by nature, just the way he wanted to. And today, a lone tree stands there where he was cremated, as a tall reminder of a man who saw the brilliant blue. And so, if you can look at the world around you, look at the sea, the sky, the gemstones, and the flowers, if you can ask the right questions and let nature reveal her wonders, if you can think about those questions even in your sleep, if you can guess the answers and into Google not peep, you can do 1,000 experiments to find the solution. And if you can verify them to your ultimate satisfaction, if you can analyze the problem from every angle, and if you can problem solve by coming up with the unthinkable, who knows, that Nobel could be yours for the taking. But, prize or not, you'll still be a scientist in the making. And that's the end of that story.